Welcome to One Word Stories. My name is Joanna Zell, and I'm really happy to welcome my new guest, Weirong Lee, who actually is a third culture kid with a vast experience in Hungary, in Austria, also with the Chinese culture. And she is the founder and the CEO of Raw Culture. So I'm really curious to hear more why this name of the platform. This is actually the platform Weirong has built with the mission of creating a community of third culture kids to really build intercultural understanding through the special angle of storytelling. And I cannot wait to hear from you, Weirong, what brought you to the field of storytelling and how you actually work with stories. A very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for this wonderful introduction. And I have to say, it's a real pleasure to be here because, as I told you and mentioned to you before, prior, is I've been watching all of your videos on One Word Stories before, so I already know that there's such an amazing series out there. So thank you for having me on today's episode, and I'm very happy to share my experience and my journey so far.
Thank you for joining. Where are you joining us today from?
I am currently in Budapest, Hungary. Yeah, usually I'm in Vienna, but because of the pandemic, I've been basically home for me, and that is in Hungary.
So, Weirong, what did actually bring you to the field of storytelling in the intercultural context?
Wow, that is quite a story, I would say. I would say it's really hard for me to pinpoint one specific moment. I feel like every single person, they kind of do something because of this collective events in their lives that led them to realize this is the direction I want to take. But more specifically for me, it was really about my personal background and more to say my ethnic background. So for those guys who don't know, basically ethnically, I am Chinese, but I was born and raised in Budapest, Hungary. And I basically lived here my whole entire life. And I spent my education in international schools. And then I moved to Vienna, Austria. So that's kind of like the culture I was a part of. And so growing up, I always had at least 3 different cultures I encountered. And so I was in a stage where I was able to observe how people interacted, communicated, and how that was different than other people around me. And so from a very early stage, I realized, whoa, people think differently, they act differently, and there's different ways that people come across. And for me, that was really interesting because a lot of people that I realized who were my friends potentially only were aware of one culture. They're monocultural. And so for me, I kind of realized the difference in terms of perhaps only seeing things from one angle. And so after that kind of experience growing up being multicultural, and as well as having the privilege of being in international school, I realized that it's so important and beneficial for us and individuals to think in different cultures, think in different colors in a way. However, at the same time, I realized that a lot of people wouldn't be able to do that. That a lot of people, despite knowing this, they kind of marginalize how they think, right? They tend to still box themselves into one kind of a way of thinking or one kind of a story or narrative. And what I wanted to do from there is that I kind of wanted to normalize what I saw and bring what I saw to other people who weren't able to see it. And how I came to storytelling is because I realized that me growing up as an Asian in Europe, I still felt there was some kind of discrepancy. And I still felt like people in a way kind of indirectly or sometimes directly still had some prejudice and discriminated me based on how I look like. And so for me to explain this feeling, one way I did that was through storytelling, was through narration, because a lot of people might not have the same experience as me, and they won't have the same story that I had. And so one way for me to kind of transmit the feeling I had was to share about what I felt during that time and how that affected me and how people can move forward after knowing my story. So one thing I would often say, or like an experience I often had, was I would be outside in Hungary. And by the way, this still happens now. I would be outside in Hungary and, I would walk across the street. I think I already told this to you, but I would walk across the street and then a local Hungarian would pass by me and they would literally say, oh, ott van egy kínai, which is, oh, there's a Chinese. And like the first thought is just, it's funny how they probably assume I don't even know Hungarian, right? It's their first assumption that they think I don't know Hungarian. And the second one is, what is their purpose in saying this? Is it in a way for it to be mocking, or is it maybe curiosity? But like after a certain amount of time, when this often happens, like literally at least 2 times a year, or actually more, it kind of grows on you and you realize it's become much more than that. And so for me, storytelling has been a not escape, but more like a portal to transmit people who weren't a part of my present journey and being able to understand what I still went through. So storytelling in and of itself is a very magical thing. It's something also very human. And because of its human elements and how you can attach emotions to it, that's a really transformative way to share whatever journey you have been on, and also bring along your friends and family and whoever is listening to your story. So
Yes. Yes.
that's an important kind of like an overview of why storytelling has been super important for me and in my journey so far.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Thank you also for diving deeper from the very, very beginning, because what I hear is, of course, first of all and above all, the stories of belonging. Yeah. And stories of assumption and this world of obviousness. And this would be also just the question that came spontaneously to my head. Is this personal journey also the reason for the name of your company, Raw Culture?
Wow. I never thought of it in that way, but now that you mention it, there's definitely a personal element to this. So for me personally, I'm a person who really likes to have kind of like honest and authentic conversations. So for example, if I get to know somebody, like maybe in the first time, I might already ask them like about their aspirations or, what they really enjoy, because I really like to dive deep and get to understand the person beyond where are you from, right? And so for me, I guess that kind of translated when I created the name Raw Culture, because I wanted it to be more than just about traditions, values, customs, but really to dive deep into what the culture or how the culture has affected the person authentically, and really place the person in a place where they're kind of vulnerable, but also honest about what they experienced on their ethnic cultural journey. So in that way, it's definitely connected.
Yeah, because this is also, of course, one more idea how we work with stories. It's all about meaning making. Yeah, so when we see the words raw culture, of course, immediately different people attach different meaning to the name, and
Right.
it's really fascinating to hear what is behind. Why wrong? You have mentioned that you very, very eagerly work with stories. What you actually do mostly is that you offer intercultural team programs, global team programs. How do you work with stories with a small group? Because when I think of a team, I immediately think of, let's say, more or less 6, 7 persons. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So the way I approach stories in groups is that I realized, first of all, that many people, they aren't very comfortable in sharing something in a way personal, like in the first introduction wise, or just kind of sharing more about their personal journey. However, one thing about stories is you can come at it with different angles. So in terms of how I work with it, is I like to first of all offer them kind of like something to trigger them, like not in a bad way, but something that kind of opens up their mind to potentially thinking about other things.
How
So
do you
that
do
would be,
it?
sorry?
Sorry for interrupting. How do you do it?
Oh, Yeah, so literally, like it's much more easier than it sounds, but you literally you can kind of do it by offering them perhaps a object, you know, by showing them an object, or perhaps doing like a pile of cards, or perhaps, you know, like have a pile of things, and that could be consisting of objects, of food grains, of perhaps even some auditory things that could, just like a bunch of different things that can also be consisted of senses, right? And then have them pick which one kind of speaks to them in a way. And then in the end, after all of this is gathered, kind of ask them, in what way did this connect with you? Why did you choose it? And if you can attach a certain story to it.
Mhm.
Because what you often find is that when somebody's inclined to picking out something, or they choose something, there's always like a ulterior, you know, reason to it. And it's something that might be like in their past experience, but it's a really great way to kind of remind them of why they might be at the current state, or had this current experiences they had, because it might be related to something in the past. And through like objects and through different triggers, they can understand how that is connected to who they are now, and also how the past experiences they had are able to contribute to their current story. And so I think it's all about really making them connected to their story, even if they don't think they are, but trying to, in a way, indirectly insinuate that, hey, you had these past experiences, and I can help you in really revealing it and portraying it to others, right? So doing it through objects, as mentioned before, senses, as well as really actively engaging the person in the storytelling journey. So I really want the person to really be totally interactive in the journey. And what I mean is, for example, purposefully doing exercises where it's about filling in the blank, where it's about what would you do in this journey or story if you were in that position. And for example, also role playing, and just seeing how they automatically react, because most of the times you can really see a person's personality and what they went through when they have this automatic response, because it's something that's already deeply rooted into them. So when you're able to kind of capture that, it already shows you a certain aspect or facade of the person, right? So it's a lot about actually self-discovery on the journey. I don't want to be giving them like all the answers and telling them to, yeah, think of this specific story, but instead try to insinuate something and let them actually be on the discovery journey themselves. So they are actually, you know, looking into themselves and reflecting. Yeah, so that actually has a lot to do with reflection, now that I realize that. Yeah, and I do think reflection is so important, because in order for you to communicate, interact, and understand others and your colleagues, you need to first of all be reflective and self-aware of what you have been through, and then recognize how that may play with other people's experiences and interactions. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. What actually makes me curious is, what is your experience when you invite sharing stories, and when you also work with people from different corners of the world? Do you see any differences in the readiness to tell stories?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think this in a way has to do with like the models of culture. So like the different cultural dimensions, as people are aware. And in some way there is a lot of patterns that you see stemming from these models, right? And for example, me having the background of coming from China as well as been in Europe, there is a big discrepancy between how readily they share their story. So for example, when I talk to a person that I know in China, and I'm kind of like diverting into something more personal, right? I can see that there is a sense of unease in the atmosphere, because one cultural thing in China specifically, and something that I kind of grew up hearing, is that don't share too much about your personal stories or your family background, unless you already really know them in a way and you can already trust them. And so in this beginning phase, for somebody who comes from perhaps, a Chinese background or an Asian background, they might feel a bit attacked in a way, or like in a way forced to do so. And that kind of may counteract. And they actually might be more defensive when you tell them or ask them, hey, can you share a personal story? Because they might assume that you are trying to get some type of information out of them, rather than just trying to understand them. Versus when I am in Hungary or in Austria, the common thing I see is that people are genuinely really excited about sharing their story. So when you for example when you ask them, hey, can you please tell me more about a time when you were small and I don't know if one of the stupid things you've done, like really random, they really enjoy sharing it because they feel like they don't have the idea that it might be kind of out of like a malice, but they feel like it's you actually want to get to know them, right? They feel like you're trying to understand them on a deeper level. And so in that sense, I feel like in Europe, it's more so that they really value this authentic conversation more or less now more than ever. However, compared to China, they also do, but they first of all like to hold a kind of threshold. And that's how you kind of get to know people, right? Because we think that in order for you to really understand and have a friend, there is a certain time that is attached to it for you to understand and actually get close to them, and investment that you have to kind of make in order for you to really go to the next level and ask them a more personal story and question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Because okay, all of us, we are right now also in the situation, especially due to this acceleration of virtual meetings, that we work with plenty people from different corners of the globe, and pretty often we tend to treat all of them the same. And right now, when you just say that, of course, we need to bear in mind the intercultural differences, this is actually what all the interculturalists, you and me included, emphasize all the time. And with this nuances, yes, this feeling for the atmosphere in the room, also the virtual room, we can really impact much better the flow, the dynamics in the group. So yes, I'm really grateful for your sharing where you see the differences. So it's not so much about the process of sharing, because when you get people over there, many people also simply enjoy telling their stories. It's just what you have just emphasized. It's a little bit of the trust building and also time aspect that plays an important role, especially when we work with stories in the intercultural field.
For sure.
Yeah. And what about the third culture kids? Because this is also a very specific group who can be considered really, let's say, growing up with this global mindset from the very beginning. What is your experience with working with stories in this group?
Right. So I have to say that a lot of people may assume that it's a great thing, obviously, to be a third culture kid, because we are also called the globetrotters, or like a citizen of the world, right? Because you're kind of a mix when you grow up. And I have to say that I do see a lot of benefits from it, and just being very privileged to be able to have had a wide eye and perspective about different people and different ways of communication and interaction, and that's really great. However, at the same time, what I realized is because we're exposed to so many cultures at such a young age, and especially during our developmental years, it often causes a crisis in our identity development. And I personally saw that as well in myself, because you have no idea where you come from. And so one thing that in a way kind of triggers us in a more negative way for third culture kids is when you ask, where are you from? Because it's very hard for us to pin it down. And when you say that, it's hard because we don't even know how to reply to you. And so I would say at this point, I can't say I'm 100% Chinese, 100% Austrian, 100% Hungarian or American. I'm all a mix. I'm still to this point. And honestly, I feel completely fine and I feel very whole by being a mix of that. And so for me, what has been very important when discussing with third culture kids about these topics is trying to not force them into a stereotype or, like a certain culture, and trying to come at it with a new and fresh perspective. So for example, if I know somebody is, Indonesian, but also lived in the US for most of her time, and also been to Germany for 10 years, I don't want to marginalize and ask questions that are directed towards those cultures, because I know that there's much more to that, and there's much more to what they experience in those cultures, but that it's a combination. So it may look a bit different than what you assume, right? For example, if you mix paint together, before there were different colors, but when you mix it together, there's a different result that comes out. So you can't expect to, in a way, think and interact with the person in only those specific countries and cultures, right? So I tend to keep more of an open mindset, being very much aware that they have different elements of their personality that is a mix of all of those that they have experienced, right? And also one thing is that positively is they have a lot of stories to share, obviously, because they've been a part of so many different experiences. So once you are able to kind of open them up by making them comfortable and feel like they don't have the obligation to just share about one specific country, but that they're very open to share about just generally experiences they had, they're very, very much encouraged to do so. And they feel like they really do want to share about their moments. And you find that they can't even stop sharing about their stories because it's like a natural process then after that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, this is also one of this, so to say, evergreen questions. Yeah. Where are you from? That causes more harm than is productive. And yeah, this is what I also have heard from many, many people, especially not only in the third culture kids context or also adult third culture kids, but in general also migrants children, yeah, that they really keep telling, why do you want me to choose one if I really feel this mosaic of different cultural influences in me? So this is also the highest time to change this meta narrative, so to say.
For
We
sure.
were so used to before this really huge wave of globalization. Yeah, people
Right.
are moving across continents, and it's really weird to force people right now to just stick to one cultural identity, which is not the case.
I was just going to add, it's really interesting how you mentioned that, and how often people want you to just share one culture or one story. And one thing I realized is because as humans, the way we function is by simplifying things, by categorizing things, by putting them in certain boxes. And so for us, like maybe some person doesn't have malice when they ask, can you please tell me, which country you feel more into? They probably just are interested and curious, because it doesn't make sense in their mind, if they're not somebody who's multicultural, for you to be from all of these cultures. The way it makes sense is for you to say one country, and they can be, aha, I know Spain. I know what kind of traditions and customs and cultures there are. And so for them, it might just be the way that humans function innately, which is by set dimensions and set cultures, right? So yeah, and that has also to do with like the cultural dimensions that we have and the models we have in the world and the systems, the rules. All of these are guidelines on what makes it clear for us on what path and what things or how to do stuff. So I feel like that's also something that's inside humans, and it definitely isn't always something that is ill-intentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, you as a speaker of two of the most difficult languages in the world, Chinese and Hungarian, you definitely also experience, I can imagine, some cultural differences when you share stories in either Hungarian or Chinese or English. So, what is the language of your choice for sharing stories?
So in terms of like my language comfortableness, my native language is actually English.
Yeah.
So that is my go-to language. And if I want to be talking about my second native language, that's Chinese.
Mhm.
And I speak Chinese with my family, with my parents, but I speak actually English with my sister. So that's
Okay.
kind of like the dynamics. And in terms of Hungarian, the funny thing is I never went to a Hungarian school besides kindergarten, but we have a lot of Hungarian friends. So like literally my dad is a very how do you say friends guy, and there would be like every single day there would be at least one Hungarian at our house, you know, just
Mhm.
like friends. And so in that way I'm kind of a have to speak Hungarian in a way. And that's how I kind of developed my Hungarian skills over the time and still was able to maintain it. But I would definitely say that I'm most comfortable with Chinese if it was still compared to Hungarian. But I always like to also see how it differs when I speak in different languages, right? Because there's also specific words that only one language can understand and one way
Yeah.
you can express it. And there isn't a substitute. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of funny when I can't find the word, I'm trying to say it in Hungarian, but I say it in English, and they're like, oh, what is that? And then I have to explain it in Chinese. And that happens all the time. But I think it's like the benefit, but also like, wow, it's so amazing. Every single culture has their own language that symbolizes some specific meaning, right? And that's also very magical.
Definitely, this is a huge enrichment. And when we talk about words, of course, it gives me the opportunity to ask you for this one word that actually was really meaningful for you in the tough times of pandemics. And what is the story behind?
Wow. Okay. So when you invited me to do this episode, like I knew that I would have to think of one word, right? Because the episode is about one word and creating a story. And the first thing that came out of mind, like literally like 1 second after, was connection.
Mhm.
Like, and then I was like, whoa, that is literally what has been impacting me and helping me throughout this whole pandemic. Because I'm somebody who really, really enjoys finding the similarity and common touch points between things, even when it seems like you are worlds apart and that you are so incredibly different and there's no potential in finding similarities. There's always one specific thing that can connect you in some way. And that could be, for example, the yeah, the culture, or for example, a value, or for example, a hobby that you enjoy sharing. All of these are just connection points that kind of bring you together and kind of further emphasizes that we're humans and that we all have kind of in this way this shared emotion and shared experiences. So for sure, connection has been a very, very strong word for this entire pandemic period. Yes.
And could you share a moment when you realized that connection plays such an important role?
Yeah, for sure. So when I started my startup, Raw Culture, I I honestly felt like it was only me who was gonna really enjoy this and who was really passionate about this. And I felt in a way kind of like a bit alone throughout the whole journey because I wasn't able to find somebody who was also really in touch with what I was doing. And I kind of felt like a loner on the journey, actually. And after when I started like really diving deep and just still continuously pouring out content and what I believe would help others, there were like a lot of people who actually messaged me and came up to me and said, whoa, Weirong, I am so incredibly thankful for what you've been doing. This really speaks to me. This also really helps me. I also had the same experience as you when you were sharing that story about you growing up in Europe as an Asian and being in a way kind of judged based on how you look like. I had the same experience, but of course in a different, way. Those are the moments that I just feel, wow, this is about human connection. It's much more than just about culture, even. It's about connecting different points. and making people feel like every single person has a valid voice and a place in this world. And you can, and you might feel alone on the journey at first, but there's always a common touch point that comes back. And so I would say that has been a real pleasure. And I'm very, very thankful for all the feedback and the support I've also had throughout this journey.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds fantastic. It sounds fantastic because this confirms once again that it's not so much about uh, when to start, how to start. The most important thing is to start. And when we start the journey, magic happens. And when we start the journey with stories, magic happens in this narrative way as well. Yeah, so stories attract other stories. So
Definitely.
this is the beauty of working with storytelling practices. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your energy you have brought to our conversation and fantastic examples how you yourself work with stories. I cannot resist reading one more sentence that is written on your background: always in a vacation state of mind. This is what I wish not only you and myself, but also all the people who listen to us. Just because, at least in Europe, this holiday season is almost over. So right now, when we are diving into this time of really working projects, that we have also this chance to create our stories this way, that we give ourselves the time and permission to recharge batteries and to have this vacation on our mind.
And speaking of that, today's discussion, it was more of a vacation for me.
Oh,
So thank you for this. I really genuinely love exploring discussions like this. So thank you once again for creating this episode and for creating this series. I think it's very meaningful and genuinely building connections among people through stories.
thank you, Weirong. Thank you. All the best.